Hi there, everyone, and welcome to Paper Wishes Weekly Webisodes. I'm Sarah Newman, and today I'm excited to show you something a little bit different and that I've been having a lot of fun playing with. Today we're going to take a look at the cream paste from Stamperia. Now this is a white paste that dries to a matte finish. It's meant to be used with molds, and I've got two of them here, and when you release the shape from the mold, you'll have an embellishment that is soft and lightweight and totally flexible. Now, those of you who like to create mixed media, I know you're already thinking of a couple of ways to put this to use. I also found it to be great fun for those of us who just like to add something a bit different to our handmade cards. Now, the embellishments are also alterable, as you can see here, and we're going to take a look at some ways to color them using some of our favorite craft supplies. Now, besides the cream paste, we're also going to use the Stamperia molds, and I've got two of them here. I've got the swirls design, and I also have the doily and lace, which you can see is already in use, and I'll show you that in just a minute. And finally, we're going to use the very gorgeous Stamperia Azulejos de Sueño 8" by 8" pattern papers for our cards. So as you can see, we have a lot to look at today, and I am so very glad you're here. Come play with us. Let's begin by filling our mold with the cream paste. I'm going to use the doily and lace mold. Now the mold plates each measure about 8" by 6", and the lace borders, you've got two, one at the top and one at the bottom. These will each be a little more than 5" long. Now before I fill this border lace piece with my cream paste, I do want to point out something about the area down here which is already dry. It looks pretty messy, and this is done deliberately. You can probably see just the outline of the border design here, and if I flip it over, you can see it maybe a little bit better. You'll notice that I've put the cream paste really going around the outside edge a little bit of that lace border, as well as filling the entire piece. And this is done deliberately because when this all dries and I'm going to remove the lace piece, I need to have something to grab from the outside edge to peel that back. Each of these designs are really quite deep and they're very detailed, so you'll need to have some little bit of it to hold on to get the piece started. So this is done deliberately, and I'll show it to you when I fill in this part of the border over here. So I'm just going to grab my cream paste. You can see I've used quite a lot of it already. Now I like to use a palette knife to apply this. You can use a spatula or even a plastic knife if you don't have a palette knife on hand. And what I'm going to do is just scoop up some of this. You can see the consistency of it, and I'll just simply apply it right onto my mold here. Now I'm going to try and be pretty careful about making sure that I've got all of the detail area in here filled in. And what I like to do is flip it over from time to time, again, just to take a look to make sure that I don't have any empty spots in there. And then simply keep going along the border. Now you do not need to work quickly because this cream paste takes quite a long time to dry. So there's no rush. You don't have to stress out about trying to get it filled in a certain amount of time. Just work carefully. Make sure that you fill that all in completely. And you may need to sort of nudge the cream paste in there a little bit as well, just to make sure that you've got it in all of the detail areas. The designs are quite detailed, so you want to make sure to take advantage of that. And I'll just tap this here. Then what I like to do is give the mold a bit of a tap, just a couple of times, to make sure that all of the cream paste has settled in all of those detail areas in there, just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. And again, kind of make sure that I've got enough cream paste extending past the edges of the border. It doesn't need to go all the way everywhere. You can kind of clean up a little bit and just return any excess back into your pot. And then what I'll do is just let this dry. Now, what I need to do is let the piece dry for about 24 hours and I let it air dry. So what I generally do is just fill up the whole mold and then come back the next day and remove all of my parts and pieces. I don't recommend using a heat tool to speed things up, as tempting as that might be, because you've got a plastic mold which isn't designed to tolerate extreme heat. Now, I do recommend that you let it dry in a warm room, so maybe turn up the heat a couple of degrees in your crafting area, and that can make a big difference in the amount of time it takes for this to dry. But on general, 24 hours is going to do it. So now while this one is drying, I can come over here and remove this piece. So what I'll do is just grab onto some of that excess and gently and slowly pull the piece out. So you don't want to yank it. You want to work quite deliberately and just be careful as you're going along here to make sure not to tear it. It is quite sturdy, but it's also a narrow piece, so you don't want to pull on it too hard. And then remove your piece. I'm going to move aside my mold, and then you can see this beautiful design. Now, what you'll want to do, of course, is clean up the edges, and you can grab a pair of scissors and just use that to clean up the straight edge on here. This can easily be cut. You won't gum up your scissors at all. And then what I like to do is just kind of pull off some of these excess bits here. And you may even want to go around some of the detail areas here with another pair of scissors, maybe a finer tip pair of scissors to get in here. I also like to, on the detail areas of the lace, come in with a pokey tool and just kind of clean out any of those areas that are supposed to be empty, kind of like an eyelet border on there. So you can see it's lightweight, it's flexible, stretches a little bit, but not too much. It's still pretty tough, and you can do some really fun things with this. You can leave it as is, but you can also alter your pieces with stamping ink and with paint, which is what we're going to look at now. The easiest way to alter your cream paste embellishments is with good old stamping ink. So I've got my border that I've removed from the mold, and you can see I've cleaned up the edges. I think you can also see as I tilt this, the detail on that beautiful border and how it looks like lace. This is going to show up a lot more after I add my ink on top. So all I need to do is simply take my ink pad and apply the ink directly onto my molded embellishment. So you can see I'm just kind of tapping the color on here. You can add as much or as little ink as you want to. I really wanted this to have a bit of a light touch just to pick up the raised areas of the design. And there you go. So quick and easy to do. Now, of course, you can also use pigment ink with this as well. So I'm going to move aside my lace piece and I'll bring in this swirl that I've also made from the molds. Now this is from the Swirls mold, and let me take a closer look at this with you. So you can see there are 7 mold shapes on here. You've got a nice big frame, and then you've also got these really pretty accent pieces. I'm going to be using this one right here. Now you'll notice that with the swirl, I've removed it from the mold, but I haven't removed all of the excess dried cream paste from around the outside edge of the design. And that's because sometimes with really detailed elements like this, I find it easier to have a little excess piece that you can kind of hang on to as you're inking. So I'm going to be using the Spectrum Noir Metallic Gold Pigment ink, and I'll apply this just the same way I did on that border. So I'm going to be pressing this directly on top and giving kind of a wiping motion on here to sort of get that ink on there. Pigment ink is a bit thicker than dye ink, and you might need to press a little bit more just to get that going. And there you can see how beautiful that is. I've got a nice shiny metallic image just hitting those raised edges on there. And then of course I can opt to remove the excess cream paste from around the outside edge. Now with both the dye ink and the pigment ink, because I'm putting ink onto a non-porous surface, we need to let the ink dry. So here's the thing. With both of these elements right now, the ink is still wet, as you can see. Now this means that if I've suddenly decided that I don't want them to be these colors, all I need to do is take them to the sink, hold them under some water, and the ink will just rinse right off. So you do have the option for a do-over if you need one. But it does mean also that you want to take some extra care when drying these. Now, if we were working on paper, we could just simply heat set these with a heat tool. Again, I don't recommend that, but instead I would recommend letting them air dry for a little bit and then using either an artist's spray fixative on top or, my personal favorite, some inexpensive hairspray. Just give a light misting on there, let it dry, and you are ready to use these elements in your projects. You can also use paint to personalize your embellishments. So here I've got one of the swirls that I've removed from the mold and then kept some of the backing on here. And I've got a little bit of acrylic paint here on my craft sheet. So all I need to do, just pick up a little bit on my brush and simply apply this right onto my cream paste swirl. So a light application or a heavy application, whichever you decide. With this one, what I want to do is make sure that I really scrub that paint into some of the detail areas of the swirl, because I can leave this as is, and once this is dry, I can remove the liner around the outside edge here. But I can also, while this is still wet, come in with a tissue or a dry cloth and just remove some of the excess paint from the top, leaving the paint in some of those detail areas there. And I think you can see that you've got the paint in the details and then kind of a softer effect on the top of the motif. So then all I need to do is let this air dry. I don't need to use a fixative or anything else on it. It is going to be ready to use, I would say, in about 15-20 minutes. Now I can leave this as is. I can also add some additional medium on top. So here I've got 1/2 of that beautiful doily shape, and I've painted it with blue, with that same blue. And while it was wet, I removed the blue from the top detail of that beautiful motif. And then what I can do is come in with some ink, and in this case I'm using the pigment ink. And then I can add some gold metallic right on top. So I'm just going to be tapping this color on, and you can see how beautifully contrasting this is and how gorgeous that looks. Now, in this case, of course, I'm going to let this air dry for a little bit and then add a fixative or, once again, some hairspray on there, and I can use this on my regular piece. Now, one question you might have is whether you can mix your acrylic paint with the white cream paste before putting it into the mold. And I tried this, and I found that it really worked better to paint after you remove the white piece from the mold. Sometimes when you're mixing mediums, it can compromise the consistency of a texture paste or a cream paste. And I really just found that it worked a lot better if I worked with just the cream paste as it comes out of the jar and then painted on top. But I figured some of you might have a question about that, so I gave it a try, and that is the answer. So coloring your embellishments is, of course, one way to use your cream paste, but I have 2 more little tricks for you. Another technique I wanted to show you is stenciling with the cream paste. So I'm using a Stamperia stencil called Tatiana's Flowers, and you can see here it's a nice big stencil. It's got 3 long floral borders on here. It's got a pretty bow down at the bottom and then also another one up here at the top. So what I'll do is just grab my stencil and a piece of that beautiful pattern paper from the paper set, and I'm just going to pop this down right on top. I'll add a bit of masking tape up here at the top just to hold everything in place. And you'll notice that I've got a little bit of the cream paste here on my craft sheet. Now, I really found that rather than using a palette knife or a spatula, stenciling worked better with a firm, dry brush and kind of a stippling action. So if you have any stipple brushes on hand, that might also do the trick. So I'm just going to come in here, pick up some of that cream paste, and stipple this right onto my patterned paper. So I'm using a bit of a pouncing motion. And you can, of course, use as much or as little as you want. I found that I really liked how subtle a light touch of the cream paste looked on that beautiful patterned paper. Kind of gave it a shabby chic or vintage look. If you want something bolder though, just add some more of the cream paste. That's no problem at all. And remember, it does take a while to dry, so you've got some time to work this in. So there's no rush, and no rush really to clean your stencil either. Because it's a water-based medium, of course, all you need to do is just run it under your sink. So I think I've got enough on here from my stencil for you to see the effect. So I'll remove the tape and then just gently lift this up and you can see that design. So it's soft and it's subtle, and I think it works really beautifully with this pattern paper here. So that is another technique to keep in mind. Keeping in with our pattern papers though, I'm going to bring in this piece of tiled paper, and I think this is just so beautiful. I wanted to add a little bit of that white on there, but then also a little bit of sparkle too. So what I'm going to do is combine a little bit more of my cream paste with some embossing powder. So let me get out a little bit more of my cream paste and put that right onto my craft sheet. You don't need to have very much on hand. The other tool I'm going to be using is an old hotel key card, and I'm going to use this to stamp my cream paste with. So I'm picking up some of the cream paste on the edge of my hotel key card, and I'm going to be following the lines printed on this tile piece. And when I do this, I'm just going to stamp to make some of those lines a little bit more emphasized. I don't have to do it perfectly because I want to have a vintage sort of distressed effect. I'll just follow this line on here. And I'm getting the peaky raised edges of the cream paste, which is a lot of fun. So I'll just add this here like so, and maybe come around on here. There we go. Now I can leave this as it is, and when it dries, it won't take very long at all to dry, but I'll have some really cool kind of pattern and lift on here. But then what I can also do is add a little sparkle. And in this case, I'm going to grab some embossing powder. And this is the copper tinsel color. So it's not only got that pretty copper color, it's also got a little bit of shine to it. Now, rather than dumping the embossing powder on here, I'm going to have a little bit more of a light touch with this. So I'm just dipping my fingers into the jar, and I'm going to sprinkle some of the embossing powder directly into that wet cream paste. So I don't want the entire thing to be covered with the embossing powder, just want a little bit here and there. And then what I'll do is pick this up, grab a piece of scrap paper, and just tap off the excess. And I think you can see where that sparkle and shine is just in some of those areas. Now I don't need to heat set this. All I need to do is just let it air dry. Same thing with my stenciled piece. It will not take very long, certainly not as long as 24 hours because you don't have the depth that we have with the molds. So this is a quicker and easier way to put your cream paste to work. So now that you've seen a couple of techniques with the cream paste, let's take a look at some card projects. You'll remember this first card project from the beginning of the webisode, and this is simply using 2 of the swirls that are inked with metallic gold and then added onto a butterfly tile. A Dazzle's word and some hearts here, and then down here on the background paper are really all you need, and it coordinates so beautifully. I've also added some of that metallic gold inking around the outside edge of the card and also the outside edge of the tile, which has been lifted up with some foam tape. Now our second card also shows inking, and this is with the Pebble Dye ink, just a really light application on the 1/2 of the doily embellishment. Again, I've got more dazzles as borders on here, some more gold metallic inking around the outside edges, and then a simple Dazzle's word on one of the tag cutouts from the pattern paper pack. Now our third card is a plain white cream paste border that you can see on here. And this is from the doily and lace mold, as you'll remember. I also used that pattern making technique we saw with the embossing powder. And in this case, I used gold rather than the copper. If I'm tilting this, you can probably see some of the shine there. And I just applied the cream paste using my hotel key card along the edges of that tile paper. And again, just one of the tags from the pattern paper collection, a Dazzle's word, and a bow, and you are ready to go. The next card is showing some of our stenciling that we've seen. And again, using the Tatiana's flowers, I've stenciled with the cream paste directly onto one of the tiles. And I think this gives you just a beautiful texture and a really subtle layer on here. I've added the Dazzles right on top. I've got some gold inking around the edge, a gold dazzle here on the border, and then you can see one of our plain white lace cream paste embellishments down here at the bottom of the card. Now, our last project is not a card, but I suspected several of you were probably thinking of using the cream paste for mixed media and some home decor items. So I picked up a plain white frame at IKEA, and I simply used the palette knife to tap the cream paste directly onto that painted frame. Now, when I applied the cream paste on with the palette knife, I really just kind of tapped it on so that I was able to get some raised textural areas. And then I let that dry. I added a white swirl that I created from the cream paste. And after everything dried, which took a couple of hours, then I painted over everything using a kind of a cream or nougat colored acrylic paint. Tapped that on and then added on a little bit of the same blue paint that we looked at earlier, that acrylic paint, just in some areas. And then when everything was dry, I could fill the frame with some of the pattern papers from the collection. I added some little pearl embellishments up here just to accent various parts of the frame. Some dazzles, again, a word, and some border dazzles down here. And I have a really fun and sweet home decor item. And with that last project, I think you've seen just some of the creative possibilities with the cream paste and molds from Stamperia. And I know that you are going to come up with even more great ideas, and I really can't wait to see them. I'm so glad that you've joined me today. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for being a part of the Paper Wishes family. We're really glad you're here with us. Be sure to leave a comment because we'd love to hear what you think. Each item that you've seen here today can be purchased separately, and you can see those below. However, we've also bundled them into a creative money saver just for you. For the money saver, just see this webisode on paperwishes.com.